Welcome, welcome, friends. This is Ray in California, and welcome to Why Should We Care About the Indo-Pacific? That's Jim. He's in a much sunnier place there in Arizona, a sunny place. Jim, you're tanned, dressed, and ready, just as if you're at a Pacific island.
Oh, that's a hell of a segue, Ray.
I'm a professional.
Yes, clearly. Well, we're really fortunate today to have one of my favorite people in the Pacific, Suzanne Vares-Lum. Suzy was a 35-year career officer in the U.S. Army and National Guard. She retired as a Major General. She's currently the president of the East-West Center at the University of Hawaii. And starting January, she'll be the director of the Asia-Pacific Center for Security Studies in Honolulu. Suzy, so nice to see you. Welcome.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Ray. It's wonderful to be joining you across the globe. Although, I would be in Hawaii. I'm actually piping in from Washington, D.C., but it's great to join you.
Well, you have our condolences.
Yes. If you spend all your time in Hawaii, you have to pay penance every so often. It's good for the soul. So, Suzy, we're going to ask you the first question for our audience. Pacific Islands, there's so many of them, they're tiny. Why should we care about little Pacific Islands?
Well, thanks so much, first of all, for inviting me to answer that question. Why should we care about the Pacific? And it's not just because I'm from the Pacific or Hawaii is a beautiful place. And I want to just mention also that my comments are my comments and do not reflect those of any institution that I've been affiliated with, past, present, or future. So I'm excited to share being a child from Hawaii, growing up in Hawaii at the crossroads of the Pacific, a place that connects the United States and Asia. And it has been significant, not just because of what we know in World War II. Most people who come to Hawaii, you think about World War II. Its strategic location, its strategic significance in being that crossroads for the amazing maritime trade that goes across the Pacific. But thousands of years ago, it was also very important. And as people migrated from Asia, in fact, some, link it back to the indigenous people of Taiwan who came down and really connected all of Polynesia using the Star Sea. And I remember when Admiral Stavridis came to visit us at Indo-Pacific, Jim, when we were there, and he was talking about his book, Sea Power. And he talked about sea power on this amazing ocean, the Pacific Ocean, the largest body of water. You could fit a couple of continents in the entire Pacific Ocean. It's so vast that those who commanded those seas were not just the U.S. Navy, although they are awesome. I got to say that. But back 2,000 years ago, people were using the stars, seas, early Pacific Islanders, going to these new places to find new opportunities. So the Pacific Ocean is filled with new opportunities, amazing culture, amazing resources, amazing economic resources, with the Pacific gold, fish, with amazing waterways, amazing people and culture that have impacted us throughout time. So there are a lot of reasons why the Pacific matters. And of course, people would tell you strategic location. As we looked at World War II, right? We think about the compelling stories, of course, about how the Pacific Islands were crucial battlegrounds, of course, with the United States and its allies fighting to control key territories. We think of Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. We think of the turning points for U.S. Victory in the Pacific. But the history, of course, of the Pacific and connecting Asia and the United States and the rest of the world goes way back. Collectively, the Pacific Island controls about 20 million square miles of oceans, larger than the landmass of Russia. And its a vast exclusive economic zone, or its EEZ, of course, give it significant influence over crucial maritime trade, the routes, the fisheries, of course, making them key players in the economic and environmental space. And we've talked about this, Suzy, and that's why. Yeah, go ahead, Ray.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to sort of, you mentioned World War II, and of course, that was maybe the last time that the great powers of the time took an intense interest in these very, very small islands And then I imagine, from their perspective, sort of the world then turned away and did its own thing for a while and left them alone. And now it feels like the world is starting to turn back toward them in a significant way, because suddenly the great powers find them interesting again. Why is that? Why are we suddenly reading stories about what China is doing in places like the Solomon Islands and Fiji and Vanuatu? Why are these things happening now?
Yeah, I think, as we see the space, of the Pacific, the geopolitical strategic competition that we're seeing played out before us. But I do have to say something, Ray. I know that people say the United States hasn't been present, but being from Hawaii, I've got to say the US government may not have writ large where you see the opening of embassies, the aid coming from USAID, like Project Governance, or presence within the Pacific Island Forum. But places like, there have been many, as I have discovered in this role that I'm playing, that there has been so much that the United States has been doing, but it's not under the umbrella of the US government. But it is important today because we're seeing the PRC's renewed interest in infrastructure investments. I was just at the PIF in Tonga, and it was just amazing. We were in this beautiful new auditorium at the Tongan High School there, and it was just built a couple weeks prior by the Chinese, and bringing Chinese labor, of course, the PRC, and it's beautiful, well done, and of course time will tell. But it was beautiful auditorium, and of course those are meeting the needs of Pacific Islanders who require infrastructure, who need it, and it is not that Pacific Islands leaders are looking to take sides, and in fact that has been said many times to me by many Pacific Island leaders, but that I think the opportunities, of course, for those who want to have influence, and we see that with the PRC wanting to invest in infrastructure, whether it's telecommunications, whether it is airports, ports, airfields, or actual physical structures of government structures. That is the onset of the rise, I think, of the PRC's Belt Road Initiative. There is more access to minerals. If you think about rare earth minerals that exist in the Pacific Ocean and the EEZ, we see an increase in this discussion on deep sea mining and its impact on the environment, and but also providing economic opportunity. So there's that balance. So there's multiple reasons: access, maritime access to actual land masses in this vast Pacific, access to minerals, and access to, I guess, economic opportunities, you could say.
So you mentioned the PIF, the Pacific Island Forum.
Yes.
Maybe you could explain what that is, what you saw when you were there, what the PIF is trying to do, and how that plays in to this clear competition between the U.S. and its allies and the PRC.
So I want to say that the 53rd Pacific Island Forums was held in Tonga, and beautiful. They did an amazing job, and it represents, of course, all of the Pacific Islands members, except, of course, the U.S. Pacific Islands, I must say. However, this last Pacific Island Forum, American Samoa and Guam, both governors applied for associate membership, and they are being considered for that associate membership for the Pacific Island Forum. The Pacific Island Forum is the major body of Pacific Islands leaders that come together and talk about the key critical issues. And in 2022, they established the 2050 strategy of the Blue Pacific continent that really goes over the main issues that they're concerned on: climate, people development, economic development, healthcare, all of these various issues together collectively. It's a consensus-based organization. It's the main regional organization of the Pacific Island leaders. So I have to mention, In 1980, the Pacific Island Leadership Forum, which was established by Ratu Serkami Sesemara, who was the first Fijian prime minister after independence, who also started the Pacific Island Forum, worked with Hawaii's Governor Ariyoshi to start the Pacific Island Conference of Leaders. And that's a separate body that was established in 1980. And the difference between that is that it includes US Pacific Islands and Hawaii. And now with the PIF's prominence and the Pacific Island Conference of Leaders, which we held at the East-West Center in 2022, is being relooked as to what role it will play and how it engages with the United States. But that Pacific Island Forum is the way in which Pacific Island leaders can share their common interests, their common goals. And in there, of course, there is a day where partners like the United States Deputy Secretary of State Kurt Campbell was there with U.S. Special Envoy Frankie Reed, who shared, of course, the U.S. commitments to the Pacific Island nations. And that included the PRC, that included Korea, Japan, Australia, of course, Australia and New Zealand are part of the Pacific Island Forum. So many other countries, even Middle Eastern countries, India, all coming to share what commitments they are making and how important the Pacific is. So, the Pacific Island Forum, jointly have said that, their number one threat is not, the geopolitical strategic competition as the U.S. as we look at it. It is really climate change and the existential threat of rising sea levels, the impact of acidification of the ocean, warming waters on its Pacific gold, which is the tuna, right? So, billions of dollars of money is made off of that. And under that Pacific Islands Forum is the Council of Regional Organizations of the Pacific, the CROP. And those CROP agencies help to advance Pacific Island issues like the Pacific Island Forum Fisheries Agency that looks specifically at how they can partner together to protect their fisheries and against IUU. And that's where the U.S. Tuna Treaty comes in, where they partner with those entities under the Pacific Island Forum. So bottom line is the Pacific Island Forum is that main entity, regional architecture for the Pacific. As a result of that, the U.S. Pacific Strategy outlines how the United States is working within that construct so that the United States can help to advance some of those priorities.
So, Suzy, you mentioned IUU, or illegal, unregulated, or unreported and unregulated fishing. And we had, not long ago, we had Ian Urbina on, who, of course, is the author of The Outlaw Ocean, runs the Outlaw Ocean Project. And he talked through how IUU fishing has really reached sort of an industrial scale never seen before. But specifically for Pacific Island countries, which, again, we're talking about very small economies, very small population, and vast exclusive economic zones to patrol. How do they handle this disparity in their own national resources, the importance of fishing to them, and yet the inability to really have a large enough sort of security force to be able to secure all of these waters?
That is a major challenge because there's billions of dollars that they are also losing because of IUU, right? Others who are coming in that they cannot patrol. I was able at the Pacific Island Forum to attend one of the foreign fisheries agency panels, and all of them coming together to look at ways in which they can leverage technology to provide early warning, to use their limited resources, and also partner with others. I think about, Jim, when we were Indo-Pacific, we were talking about focusing on Palau, and I think that's a great example of partnership. The coastal surveillance system provided by the Office of Naval Research to help provide that early warning, working with Australia and Japan to provide the patrol boats and the training with Japan and the operations center that would provide that kind of early warning and the training to those personnel, and working with the U.S. Coast Guard to find out what kind of laws need to be in place, what kind of judicial system has to be in place, because what are the consequences when you do find someone who is coming into their EEZ and doing illegal activities. What are those things? But I think, and also the combined information sharing, the FFA are working across the board with also other agencies in the Western Pacific on information sharing. I think there's a lot of movement towards creating a common operating picture and common understanding, but it is a challenge. It is a constant challenge that comes up all the time because it's very difficult to enforce. Even if you do find someone who is violating the EEZ of a particular nation, it is very difficult to enforce.
Right. Well, as you said, it's a huge EEZ for countries with minimal Coast Guard capabilities, and our
Yes.
Coast Guard can't patrol it all by itself either. But what I keep hearing is the existential issue for these countries is climate change, and they've been pressing this for years, and yet, as we've seen this past year, oceans continue to rise, temperatures continue to increase. At the PIF, did they ask for anything new from partner countries like us, and what more should we be doing? That's sort of low hanging fruit. Anything you can think of?
Of course, the U.S. shared its progress by opening the embassies, Solomon Islands, Tonga, Vanuatu. Also, sharing, of course, the first ever U.S. Pacific partner strategy that's going to help. Also, commitments of working with Congress to provide over $8 billion in new funding for Pacific Islands. And of course the COFA. The compact agreement renewal was a big win that they were able to share, of course, with Republic of the Marshall
And
Islands.
sorry, I just want to COFA is Compact of Freely
Association.
Associated States, right? So
Yes, yes, yes.
yeah, and if you could just explain that very quickly.
Yes, thank you, thank you. So it is the compact with the Federated States of Micronesia, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, and Palau, and that provides security access for the United States in exchange for commitments to financial commitments to a variety of services and support for these key critical locations in the Northwestern Pacific. And so, the funding, one of those areas that agreements, like for example, in the Republic of the Marshall Islands, was access or support in providing access to climate funding for climate adaptation. So if you look at the Marshall Islands in itself, Majuro, for example, all of these overlays predictive analysis on rising sea levels and what it will do to Majuro. They want, looking at what are some climate adaptation investments that can be made to prevent, and mitigate the impacts of sea level rise to those communities, airfields, ports, communities, infrastructure. Those are all very important for the people as well as for the United States access for security.
And just sort of, for those of us who don't sort of live in these places and don't, we sort of look at it and we say, look, climate change is this big thing, right? And here are these small places, and obviously their ability to change the direction of climate change or the impact, it seems minimal, and so they have to do these things to mitigate the impact. What kinds of things are they? Do they build dikes? How do they actually mitigate the effects of climate change on their very small island countries?
There's been a lot of analysis on a very measured, I've heard this actually at the Rising Down Under by several Pacific Island leaders, that moving migration is not their number one choice, but those are some realities that people are looking at today at different places. Even digital communities that people are creating. So if certain very low-lying atolls go under, what will happen to those people? But do they still own that EEZ? who has authority over that? They do, right? They want to make sure that claim is made, even if they have to migrate. The other thing is maybe from the coastal areas, looking at long-term movement, maybe upland outside of the coastal areas. The other thing, of course, that have been talked about, not as popular, of course, is we've seen what can be done in terms of recreating shorelines using man-made construction that we've seen in many other places. That could be done. Of course, there's environmental impacts to that. So those are questions. Also, there are some amazing technology and research. So there's been a lot of research done in terms of how do you create breaks that are further off from the shoreline? And I'm not a scientist, so I want to be clear about that. But I have heard many of these scientists looking at different ways that you can create breaks way out of the shoreline. So, constructing some of these structures that would prevent or at least mitigate immediate impact to rising sea levels and more intense shore, impacts to the shorelines. So that's pretty amazing. There's a lot of technology and research going on. And I think within the research community, whether it's East-West Center, University of Hawaii, and other universities, and by the way, when I was in Palau, Rhode Island, Stanford, University of Florida, across the United States, to the point of, is the United States been there? Many of our academic institutions have been working in the Pacific, even with France, French Polynesia, looking at ways in which many of these Pacific Island nations can look at ways to invest in mitigation to the impacts of more intense natural disasters, rising sea levels, and monies that are going into how do you create coral reefs that are resistant to warming waters. These are the exciting research opportunities that are out there. So investing in climate research can really be it doesn't have to be a controversial thing on how it's happening. The fact is it's happening. And we tend to sometimes debate on why it's happening. But if we look at that, it's happening, and the Pacific Islands are going to be the first ones on the front lines of climate change to see its impacts, then we all can see and invest in that research, and the world can benefit from it.
So the issue, I think, is these are tiny countries with tiny economies, and the cost of some of this mitigation would be really more than they can afford. China tends to do things on a loan basis. So countries in a situation where they can't pay back the loan, and what do they give up for that? The U.S. and our Western allies have been, frankly, a little slow to invest in these major projects. And I don't know if in our current budget situation, if that's going to improve. And my fear is that migration is going to be seen as the easier approach. And in fact, Australia's cut a deal, I think, with Tuvalu to start basically acting as a giant life raft. So, as you said, is that the way the world's going to go?
So the Pacific Island Forum talked a lot this last time about the Pacific Resilience Facility. How do you create resilience in the Pacific Islands given everything that's happening? So the U.S. Commitment during the Pacific Island Forum was announced a $20 million towards, and that's just the U.S. commitment, but there were many others, millions of dollars towards the Pacific Resilience Facility, which is slated to be in Tonga. So this would be a facility that looks at how do they help address many of these issues so that migration doesn't have to be the number one solution, that there are other ways. And also how they can build up their economies to help invest in some of these future, like you said, the economies are not that big, but working together, creating microfinancing facilities to create economic opportunities, whether it's fisheries or whether it's agriculture, whether it's tourism or other technology investments that can happen using the oceans as a source. I think there's $50 million that the United States has committed to that. And of course, the United States committed to a 5-year program to boost Pacific Island countries' access to climate finance, because there is a lot of climate finance out there, not just the United States, right? There's the Green Climate Fund. But here's the issue that I hear all the time is that most people don't know how to access that, right? And even if you do, there's a lot of bureaucratic steps. And like you said, Jim, many of these are smaller, they have smaller staffs. How do you access them? And because they are free, oftentimes the standard at which you can use them to invest in infrastructure or reinforcement or whatever it is, it's difficult to get through there. So there are working groups that the United States is helping, working with allies and partners to look at ways in which you can help countries in the Pacific Islands access some of that climate fund.
So we talked a little bit about how great power competition plays out in some of these small countries, but there's another competition that's been going on for quite some time now, and that's the competition for recognition between Beijing and Taipei, China and Taiwan. And what we've seen in recent years is some of the countries used to, and in fact, sort of maybe a surprising number of Pacific Island countries continue to recognize Taiwan up until recently, and then in recent years, we've seen some of these flip their recognition from Taiwan to Beijing, and now I think there's maybe 3 left that still recognize Taiwan. So a couple of questions here. One is, why is it that these have been some of the last holdouts in recognizing Beijing? Why is it the Pacific Island countries is one of these places where Taiwan has continued to have this recognition? Why do they care if Palau still recognizes Taiwan? What does that matter to Taiwan? And how does this play out in these countries? I mean, what does it mean to a country that all of a sudden China starts putting pressure on them? You have to recognize us, and how is Taiwan responding? How does this whole competition play out in these little countries?
Yeah, I think I would say from what I hear, and in the Pacific, is that countries want to maintain their own sovereignty, number one. They don't want to choose. And I think, however, at the same time, a leader in the Pacific is responsible for its people. So the leaders will go to where there are opportunities. So if the offerings are made and it's easier to access Chinese money, that's the decision that leader will make if there's no other options, right? So that's a message to everybody else on other options. So the 3 Pacific Island nations that continue to recognize Taiwan, of course, the Marshall Islands, Palau, and Tuvalu. So, of course, Marshall Islands, Palau are at COFA. The recently, of course, switching, of course, in 2019 was Solomon Islands and Kiribati and Nauru in early this year. So for, Taiwan, in terms of the fewer people who recognize Taiwan, of course, makes the case that it threatens Taiwan's independence as a democratic nation. And these Pacific Islands want to, of course, maintain their own democracies, maintain their own sovereignty. And that's important to Taiwan. And having that partnership is important to them because, of course, it affects the influence that China has and the statement that China is trying to make about Taiwan. And going back, by the way, the Pacific Islands know that, particularly in Polynesia, that the 16 tribes of Taiwan, by the way, are indigenous people of Taiwan that find its Austronesian roots to Taiwan. That's why the Festival of Pacific Arts and Culture had the first going in presentation was the indigenous people of Taiwan. I just say that because a lot of people don't know that, the roots of the Pacific to the indigenous people of Taiwan. So it was not, they were the first peoples there. So in any case, that is why Taiwan continues to invest also in the Pacific Islands and to do what they can. And, at the East-West Center, they fund our Pacific Island Leadership Program, which actually allows all Pacific Island young mid-career leaders to go to Taiwan and Hawaii, and has been doing this for 10 years now. But but again, the pressure, if for many of these countries to not recognize Taiwan is real.
Yeah, in the contest for influence in the region between China and the West, we put a lot of emphasis on family ties, church ties, sports ties. Um, do you think that's effective, is useful? And I just want to remind people who are listening that Pacific Islands have a huge number of their people who joined the U.S. Armed Forces.
No, that's right. No, I think it's very important. So if you just look at diaspora, those, for example, Tonga, when we were there, more people live outside of Tonga than in Tonga, right? And where do they go, right? You take a look at where do the hearts of Pacific Islands go to where there's opportunity? Hawaii, of course, California. For Micronesian communities, it's Arkansas now with the chicken factory there. They welcome in many in the community there. Utah, many Pacific Islands, Australia, New Zealand. Those are the places that we have strong bonds. And you look at remittances that go back to Samoa, Tonga, um, and those who serve in our military. Those of us who've served, we know we've had many from the Pacific. Percentage wise, of course, at one of the highest rates in the nation of service from the COFA states, Micronesia, Marshall Islands, and Palau. And so there is a deep connection to the United States through that diaspora, through because of the democracy, and also what you said too on faith. Faith is a huge connector with the United States and other Western countries to the Pacific. It plays a significant role. And I think we could
One of
leverage
the
a little more sports diplomacy. Australia and New Zealand do that well.
One of
Sorry,
the
Ray.
factors that often comes up when we talk about smaller countries or smaller nations is the effect of what we would call elite capture. What our one of our previous guests, former Ambassador John Hennessy Nyland, called corruption. And the fact is that, of course, all countries have corruption, but smaller countries are maybe in some ways more susceptible to it because a little money goes a long way. And so, what is your perception of the corruption problem in some of these countries, and what can we do about it?
Yeah, no, those are great points. Some of the one of the strategic lines of effort for us at the East-West Center is supporting good governance, and that's because a direct result of what's happening not just in the Pacific and around the world, the rise of authoritarian regimes and disinformation and the challenge of good governance. Some of the things that the 2050 strategy of the Blue Pacific continent wants to invest in, of course, is governance is one of their main pillars, and that's of course including the well-being of people, and it's not just lining the pockets of those who have access, the elite capture. And one of those areas is through education, leadership programs, actual programs that are in the Pacific. And I'm really happy to say that, one of the new programs that we have at the East-West Center is the Rising or Resilient Pacific Island Leadership Program. There is also one at Johns Hopkins, the Resilient Rising Pacific Island Leaders, taking high-level leaders, mid-career leaders to understand, or share in their understanding of democracies. What is good governance? How do we ensure free and open press? How do we ensure transparent rule of law governance in their countries by through leadership opportunities? And those have been increasing, and I think those are important. And even scholarships. For example, the U.S. South Pacific Scholarship Program, we really had a smaller number, but we have doubled that number, the U.S. State Department giving it to the East-West Center. having exposure and connections, dialogue on these key critical issues are important through these kinds of programs. As I understand it, the PRC offers literally hundreds to the Pacific Islands to go to China, teaching Chinese, and oftentimes to key critical leaders. Now, education is important, and I don't blame many of these Pacific Islands for taking those opportunities when there are not enough opportunities in other places. But I'm happy to say that, at least those have doubled in some areas, and there is a renewed understanding that having access to these leadership programs and education are important, and connections, people to people connections, that creates a sort of network of accountability of one another, understanding why that's important to have transparent, good governance in communities. I think rule of law and why that's important. So one of the other programs is a USAID grant called Project Governance, and it's going through the Pacific communities, and part of that funding is coming to also the East-West Center, actually helping journalists within the Pacific Islands report on finance and law, so legal issues throughout the Pacific. And I think those are important programs because when they don't exist, where there's a vacuum, other people will fill those in. So I'm excited to share that. Those are the kinds of things that we can do, but we need to do more.
So in the recent years, the Biden administration announced the reestablishing of embassies in the Pacific, and as well as some Peace Corps programs. The
Yes.
rollout's been unfortunately slow, it seems. How's that being greeted, however, in these islands, and especially since the new administration is talking about cutting federal activity? What would that do if these were reversed?
I think it very welcome, of course. Pacific Islands are very grateful for the embassies. In fact, I got to visit the Tongan embassy where they're starting services there. And, many of the Pacific Islands have a very strong connection with the United States. But because you don't have embassy services, they often have to go to Fiji. And if you know the cost of flights, it's already expensive to go to Hawaii to here. Can you imagine just to go to get a visa to get back to the United States? So that and visit family or other opportunities, or whether they're educational opportunities, they have to go elsewhere. But now with Solomon Islands, Tonga, Vanuatu, those openings and providing services there, that's going to make a huge difference. I feel like, just reading or across both administrations, and you and I were there across both administrations at Indo-Pacom, I think the understanding of the importance of the Pacific across administrations, I think, existed from the first Trump administration, of course, the current Biden administration, and I think going forward, I think I'm hopeful that the importance will still be placed on engaging in the Pacific.
All right. Well, Suzanne Vares-Lum, as an exit question, I just want to give you a chance to talk about what you have been up to in your life. You're leaving your post now. You're going to a new post. Tell us a little bit about East-West Center. Tell us a little bit about APCSS, the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies, and what made you choose to move along.
Well, thank you so much, Ray. So the East-West Center was established by the U.S. Congress in 1960. Eisenhower signed the authorization, Lyndon Johnson, to bring together Americans, Asians, and Pacific Islanders to study, to learn from each other, really promoting the kind of network that will last a lifetime. And as a result, there have been 13 heads of state who've come from the East-West Center, including Ratu Serkami Sesemara, and I'm very excited to announce that we now have former Secretary General of the Pacific Island Forum, Henry Puna, who is also the Prime Minister of the Cook Islands, who's now on our board at the East-West Center. So East-West Center, congressionally funded, congressionally established, and its connection has gone across administrations, focused on developing and equipping leaders, convening impactful dialogues, partnering with the Pacific Islands with its Pacific Islands Development Program, and fostering environmental solutions and supporting good governance. And I'm happy to say that that strategy was created by a bipartisan board, because we had Pompeo appointees under the Trump administration when I came in 2022 that helped us to establish that, and 5 Hawaii Democrats. So we had a wonderful elected, foreign elected board members. So it's a wonderful institution, soft power diplomacy, to help to build allies and partners, long-term, and connections, good governance, and promoting democracy and a transparent and way of life. And I'm moving to the Asia-Pacific Center for Security Studies that is under the Office of Secretary of Defense, that focuses on empowering connections, allies, and partners in the security realm. And it has, of course, an element of a think tank, element of programs that bring together allies and partners throughout the region and the world, particularly in the security and military defense, to create that understanding and solutions, whether it's maritime security, supply chain, long-term Indo-Pacific issues, being that central point. People call it a think tank, but it's more than that. It's really, again, about programs. The same with East-West Center. We also have an East-West Center, by the way, in Washington, D.C., which is another reason why I'm here too. That team does the whole Asia Matters for America and America Matters for Asia and subnational level. I'm moving, I had a 3-year term at the East-West Center, and this offered this opportunity to move to the Asia Pacific, Daniel K. Inouye Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies, and I'm honored to do that. And again, and I just, I know Jim, you said 35 years, but it's 34 years in all 3 components of the Army, Reserve, National Guard, and active duty. So I am excited to leverage my experience back in the defense world, and having served 5.5 years at Indo-Pacific Command. I'm very excited. I'm grateful for the opportunity at the East-West Center to see how the two work together, the soft power diplomacy and also soft power diplomacy in the military diplomacy space. So very exciting times.
All right. Well, Suzanne Vares-Lum, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for educating us on this part of the world, and we hope to have you back sometime. Well, Jim, this is the second one of these Pacific Island episodes that we've done. And of course, what always comes up, and the thing we always have to keep coming back to is, I understand what some of the issues are. I understand why certain things are so important to, the Marshall Islands or Nauru. But, we have to come back to this question of why should we care? Right. And I think that's when you talk about these islands that have been sort of out of sight, out of mind for most people in America or the West or other places for so long, the question of, why should the American taxpayer care, for example, is going to come up.
Well, sure. But this comes back to, first of all, memories of World War II, where we had to island hop at great cost, because who controls these islands? It's unsinkable aircraft carriers controlling a huge swath of the sea lanes that cross the Pacific. And the goal of the Japanese, of course, was to cut us off from Australia, the other unsinkable, bigger aircraft carrier. Right.
Yeah. And I think that brings us back to, how we personally encountered this down under, where Australia looks at these islands and sees, places along the supply route to very, very important places to Australia, whether it be Southeast Asia, Japan, of course, and ultimately the United States.
Well, it's also important to think Kiribati is actually south of Hawaii.
Yeah.
So it's not that far, and it's thousands of miles, but still not that far from U.S. territory. And Kiribati is now more and more influenced, it seems, by the PRC.
Right. And so that's why I think, again, as, sort of Americans, we think, well, if the PRC is that interested in it, maybe we should pay a little attention as to why we might be interested in it.
And we have years of neglect. I mean, yes, we paid attention to the northern Pacific Islands, the COFA states, as we discussed, but the rest, not so much. When I was in Indo-PACOM, there was an outbreak of measles on one of the islands. So they asked us for help. our our Surgeon General guy at Indo-Pacom said, $30,000, I can go there and immunize the whole community. And he was told there's no money.
Yeah.
Now, talk about cheap goodwill, right?
Right. Right. Yeah. So a little goes a long way. So, I mean, ultimately, it, I think the way this plays out in a lot of these places also is that, yes, on one hand, we try to go there and say, look, we're interested in you because of you, right? We want to be able to say we care about Palau because it's Palau and we love everyone from Palau. But the truth is they're getting a lot of this attention because of the great power competition, right? And I think that they get that. And I think that they know that it's not like they're not naive, right? We don't show up more now just because, ticket prices are low or we really like to dive the coral reefs. We're showing up now from places like Washington, D.C. or Honolulu or Beijing or other places because there is this competition now going on and there is strategic space. There is stuff like China, Taiwan recognition. There are these geopolitical forces at work. And while it's kind of insulting in a lot of ways that's why we're interested, at the same time, there are some benefits for them.
Real politic lives, Ray.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Ray, on that note, I'm sure you have a story that will illustrate all this great geostrategic thought we have.
Yes, it's all about a stuffed animal. Actually, I was going to draw in the Hawaii connection because before I went to Australia, my family and I stopped off in Hawaii, and my daughter at the time was in college. And as we went through SeaWorld in Hawaii, she has this habit of finding the most unusual stuffed animal she can find and just sort of fixating on it. And so at SeaWorld, she fixated on a hammerhead shark, which of course is not everyone's idea of the most beautiful of all animals. It's kind of an odd looking thing, but that shark became like her long-term companion and went everywhere with her. And when she would go on an airplane, she would sort of sleep on the shark. But unfortunately, one time when she was visiting us in Hawaii, the shark got left behind on an airplane. And so on the transition from the Canberra, Sydney, and then back to the US, the shark got left on a plane in Sydney. So I get this note from, high above the Pacific somewhere saying that the shark had been left behind and that made her very sad that she lost her shark. And so I called down to the Sydney airport and find out the shark is there and they've got it lost and found, but they're only going to hold it for so long. So I don't have any plans to go to Sydney anytime soon, but fortunately we had an Army Special Forces officer there in Canberra who happened to come by my office and was going through Sydney. And I said, well, look, Dave, there's this thing with this shark. Do you think you could just stop by the Lost and Found and get this shark? And he says, fine, sure, no problem. And I said, by the way, Dave, the shark's name is Noodle. And Dave, yeah, I mean, if you have to call the shark, right? So, maybe they're going to ask the shark if he recognizes this guy. So I said, the shark's name is Noodle. And Dave, the Special Forces officer, says, no, this is Operation Hammerhead. So Noodle, there was a rescue operation. Noodle was rescued in Operation Hammerhead, and I'm pleased to say that no one was injured in the operation.
Well, Ray, your stories have now finally jumped the shark.
Well done, sir. Well played. I came in with the first segue. You go out with the last one. And so on that sorry note, with the dad joke, our producer today is young enough to be our son, Ian Ellis Jones. Please check out his graphics at his X account at Ian Ellis Jones. And of course, if you enjoyed this podcast, you should listen to more of them, like the one with John Hennessy Island, where we talked the former ambassador to Palau, like the one with Ian Urbina, where we talked about illegal fishing. Please make sure you check us out. Oh, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. That helps you. That helps us. It's youtube.com at IP Podcast. If you're listening to this and you want to watch us. Otherwise, we're on Apple Podcasts. We're on Spotify. We're on Amazon Music, all of that stuff. But please check out some of our other episodes. And make sure you come back real soon and join us again on Why Should We Care About the Indo-Pacific?